Metaphor ReFantazio, released in October of 2024, marked a significant moment in RPG history. And why is that? Well, sit down and buckle up, because I'm here to tell you why. Metaphor ReFantazio is the peak turn-based RPG of the last decade. Hello, welcome to the video. I am Vento Livre, or just Vento. I've been a longtime fan of RPGs since my early days playing the original Final Fantasy back on the NES as a kid. Whether it was the Tales of series or Shin Megami Tensei, the latter of which is the most relevant to today's video, I've spent way too much time playing and replaying these games. Like, way too much time. I've accidentally skipped meals because I've gotten so absorbed in some of these games, especially Metaphor. I can hear you saying, Vento, skipping meals isn't healthy. To which I say, yeah, you're probably right, I should do something about that, but peak. Now, there won't be too much matching up of video and audio here, so enjoy the B-roll while I yap about what's arguably my favorite turn-based RPG. There's a lot to say, so let's get started. Beginning with the story itself, Metaphor has a fair number of tropes that many of you will most likely recognize. Ruling class stepping all over the lesser or poor people, racial discrimination, severely imbalanced system where the church holds the most sway. The usual start to the classic, save a puppy, then kill God timeline. The neat thing about this is it's not a slow build-up in Metaphor. Mere minutes into a new game, you're met with a cutscene that throws out any pretense or misgivings. A man who is of the Parapis race, or tribes as they're called in-game, is being accused of the crime of misusing Igniter, which is a fancy little device like a necklace that lets you use magic. Fireballs, slicing winds, that sort of thing. Despite pleading innocence, he's hung at the gallows while the people watch on and cheer while enjoying their food and drink. Like it's some kind of halftime show. And all of this is within the first 30 minutes of the game. No beating around the bush here. This world sucks. And that's the beauty of it. You're shown immediately how bad things actually are. It's not something you find out in a revelatory cutscene midway through with exposition and banter from the big bad revealing themselves. You just know from the start, everything's messed up. The main plot revolves around the protagonist and his fairy companion Gallica on a mission to infiltrate the military of Grand Trad in order to meet with an ally that has been searching for the individual responsible for cursing the prince, who is the only true heir to the throne and longtime best friend of the protagonist. Of course, things can't go smoothly. That would just be too easy now, wouldn't it? The player soon gets acquainted with a young man named Stroll. More on him later. Just know, he's a bro. When Stroll and the protagonist reach a fort on the border of Grand Trad, things get bad. And by bad, I mean it hits the fan. Turns out, almost the entire platoon of soldiers were massacred by something. Some giant monster. The protagonist and Gallica, worried for their contact, rush in with Stroll and see the thing. A big thing. Wings on its head, big old blades protruding from the arches of its feet. It looks like something you'd see in a food-induced nightmare. Not speaking from experience or anything. I'm just saying it could happen. Turns out, it's a human. But not a human like you and me. Something different. Twisted, almost perverse? A few soldiers draw the monster's attention away and it chases after them further into the fort. This allows the protagonist and Stroll to fight their way through some lesser creatures such as teeth and wolves. RPG staples. You're level 1, you fight a giant tooth. It just makes sense, that's how it works here. And this place also acts as a basic tutorial for general field navigation and the flow of combat, choosing turns, interacting with enemies on the field, etc., etc. After reaching the final area of the fort, they come face to face with the beast for a second time, only to get the beat down of their lives. Nothing they do is working. They can barely land a scratch on it. Mere moments away from death, the protagonist hears a strangely familiar voice, a calm one, almost motherly in tone. She asked him to choose his path. Will he give up his goals and ambitions? Or will he fight on to save the life of his dearer and closest friend? accepting a path that is sure to be filled with strife and struggle, we get introduced to archetypes, or rather, one in particular, the Seeker. Another brief tutorial fight ensues against the human, and then it's into the game proper. The story itself gives players a first-hand look and experience of the world. It's bleak but full of life at the same time. The writing was absolutely astounding. Every time I would stop for the day while playing this, I'd have to fight the just one more voice in the back of my head. As the story progresses, your main goal of saving the prince changes due to something very plot heavy with a twist event that I honestly did not expect my first time going through it all. I won't go into details for those that haven't played yet, but please, if you haven't, play the game. You're missing out. It's a masterpiece of work. What's a good story without matching visuals? Well, it's a book. And we don't play books with turn-based combat. Studio Zero, the development team for Metaphor, did a fantastic job with rendering the game in such a unique art style. From the character designs, the portraits, the user interface, and the environments. Every little detail shows a love and dedication to the craft that I've sorely missed in recent years. Even something as simple as the particle effects for abilities in combat have a unique flair to them that catches my eye no matter how many times I see them. Not only that, but the designs of playable cast are each unique and speak volumes about them. Stroll's outfit, as an example, consists of a fancy, but not too fancy, set of attire, such as a little neckerchief, a yellow coat bearing a family coat of arms on its back. He is from a noble house, albeit in the countryside, but he's proud of his lineage, and he willingly displays that without any shame. If you've played any other Atlas title, such as the Persona or even the Etrian Odyssey series, you're bound to notice a wonderful mix of personality and expression in the art direction, music, and general structure of the game as a whole. It's nice to see so much inspiration being pulled from prior games in Atlas's library. And speaking of Atlas's library games, let's get into the combat. Metaphor's combat consists of two what I call phases. The first being field combat, where you can actively move, attack, and dodge enemy attacks in the open areas of the map, such as the various fields and dungeons of the game. This gives you the chance of avoiding combat entirely, not having to worry about random encounters, or you can just hunt down enemies to your heart's content. The choice is up to you. By attacking enemies in the field, you'll deplete a stamina bar that will stagger the enemy when it's gone. Once that happens, just hit the squad battle button to start combat with a huge advantage. I'm talking not just one, but two advantages. For starters, the enemies will take a significant amount of damage at the start of a battle, and they'll be stunned for a whole turn. That gives you a lot to work with, very big head start in combat, especially when exploring a newer area and going against enemies you're not quite familiar with. Get a little bit of breathing room to strategize. Now, once you enter squad battle, that's where things get really fun. Metaphor uses a mix of battle systems that were previously used in the mainline SMT games as well as Persona. The most important mechanic, in my opinion, is the press turn system. During your turn, there will be icons at the top of the screen denoting how many actions you can take. But the neat part is that you can get even more actions, or possibly less, depending on what you do. Say you see a giant moth. It's weak to wind and pierce damage, so you use a wind spell or an attack from a weapon such as a spear. Not only will you do more damage for hitting a weakness, but you'll notice the turn icon doesn't go away entirely. This is what's called a half icon, meaning you basically got a free action. However, on the other hand, you hit an enemy and they block the damage type, such as the slime enemies, who completely nullify strike or blunt damage, your turn will end immediately, no matter how many press turn icons you have left. There's risks when fighting new enemies, but the type of enemy themselves and their skills will help you figure out just what kind of a strategy to employ. If they're using a lot of fire-based attacks, odds are they're probably weak to ice damage. Archetypes, the meat and potatoes of the combat system, function kind of like a persona. Each has its own strengths and weaknesses, and everyone can equip any archetype outside of combat. Unlike Persona 3, 4, and 5, where the only person that can have multiple persona would be the player character, such as Dorkun, Yu Narukami, or Joker. Unlike Persona, however, archetypes function more like classes or jobs, such as in Final Fantasy V. Seeker, for instance, is capable of using single-target offensive and support skills, while Warrior swings a giant slab of steel around with raw strength. Healer, using light element offensive spells and a variety of healing abilities, contrasts with the Mage, which bombards enemies with elemental damage. At a base level, it's pretty simple. This does that, that does this. However, when it comes to the real fun part of combat, we gotta talk about synthesis skills. Synthesis skills are special abilities that require two party members to be able to use. They can be anything from a multi-hitting attack or a stronger skill that you just won't have access to until you progress further into the game. The downside is that it requires two press turn icons. So if you only have one press turn icon left, you won't be able to use synthesis skills until your next turn. This system was also in Digital Devil Saga 1 and 2, which are my favorite Shin Megami Tensei games of all time. Depending on the skills you had equipped, your party could gain access to some incredibly game-breaking abilities. I'm talking taking out a quarter of a boss's health on turn 2 level of crazy. The only difference with Metaphor is that synthesis skills are more so tied to the archetypes that are in the active party, not so much the skills that you have set. Playable cast, as I mentioned before, have a variety of unique personalities and reactions to various situations throughout the game. Stroll is very rash and headstrong, usually rushing in without a second thought. Despite this, he is a steadfast ally and a good friend who is willing to put his life on the line to defend what he believes in. Heizme is like the team's grandpa. A seasoned fighter with far more life experience than the rest, he gives a very pragmatic view on things and acts in a much more calm and composed manner, even going so far as to relate to a minor antagonist with whom he shares the experience of losing a child. Yufa, the adorable Mustari priestess, has the greatest reactions to so many things. She has never set foot outside of her home island to the south of Grand Trad. Seeing her learn about the outside world in real time is a beautiful thing. She must be protected at all costs. No, I'm not biased. Shut up. Seeing so many different personalities all interacting with each other just shows how talented the writing team for Metaphor truly was. Each interaction feels so fluid and natural. Different viewpoints that can come together and form a powerful bond of friendship and camaraderie makes for a wonderful focal point, allowing players to really connect with the characters. There's so much more I could say about this game, but if I did, this video would be a couple hours long, and I've already decreased the size of this script 4 times today. I do not have the mental fortitude for a video that long. Instead, you'll just have to wait for the next one. Thank you all so much for listening to me ramble on about this game. If you enjoyed the video, let me know your thoughts on Metaphor ReFantazio in the comments below. Maybe drop a sub to the channel too. I've got a lot more planned in the future, so keep an eye out for more RPG related content.